All right, welcome to another episode of the Getting to Club podcast, where you get to steal the playbooks and the skills of the top 0.01% of B2B tech sales practitioners. And like I always say, sometimes I interview those people, and sometimes I just have episodes where I talk about some of their techniques myself. Today is an interview with one of them. I have Sean Gentry. And Sean, you're, correct me if I'm wrong, Director of Sales over at Webflow. Is that right?
Technically, senior manager of corporate sales, but yeah, I run corporate sales at Webflow.
Senior manager of corporate sales. And you have a pretty impressive track record, right? Like you spent a bunch of time helping grow outreach. And one of your claims to fame that you're not famous for yet, but we're about to make you famous for is, I think if I'm remembering right, you are the first person to do a manager course with us at pclub from somebody who's not me, right? I've already done a couple of them, but you're the first external person to get yours to the finish line. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So the name of the course is Unlock the Level Up. And this is a course that frontline managers can use to unlock new levels of performance with their account executives using data-driven coaching and using what Sean refers to as issue diagnosis. So we're going to spend some time talking about that today. Let's start with that second topic, those words I just used, issue diagnosis. Help us understand what you mean by that and why it's important for frontline managers to get right.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. First and foremost, so stoked to have that title. The first person to put out management material for you here at pclub. I truly believe that issue diagnosis is arguably one of the most important things you can do as a frontline manager. So often do you have a manager who will only coach to an end result, like a conversion rate or average deal size or sales cycle time. And they'll tell you simply to do more or to make it better or to raise the metrics or to sell bigger deals without actually diving into the exact behavior or metric that's going to tweak or influence that result. Right. So I've been managing different segments over the last decade, anything from SMB to corporate to enterprise, and built this guide over my years as a frontline manager and then as a director over at Outreach to really help managers dive in and basically work backwards. So if you understand that you've got a rep that's struggling with conversion rate, they're having a tough time closing as many deals as they need to be to hit or surpass their quota, you could actually look in and work yourself through a checklist of what may be working, what isn't working, to dive into a specific instance, metric, behavior, and then coach to that so that you're going to see much faster results and ultimately make your life a lot easier as a manager.
Yeah, one of the things you said as you were answering the question is some managers coach to a result and some managers coach to leading behavior. And I would actually argue, and I'm sure you would agree with me, I like to nitpick on semantics here, that if you're coaching to a result, you're actually not coaching at all. You might be managing if you squint a little bit, right, but even that, you're not influencing behavior positively so that it has a positive outcome downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a sales rep and you're struggling with conversion rate, you want to fix that, or I would assume you would want to fix that, and you'd want to close more deals. But unfortunately, most reps don't know what to do to influence them closing more deals. And so that is the ultimate job of a manager, is be able to look at the key things that do influence that, coach to the rep, be able to check that coaching and hold them accountable on a daily or weekly basis so that you're not just telling them, hey, go out and close more deals, and then you got to wait weeks or months to actually see if that result's going to come to fruition.
Well, one of the things you're empowered to do as a manager is use your pattern recognition, right? Because you just mentioned, the rep wants to close more deals or close more revenue or achieve some result, but they don't always know how. They don't see the bigger picture. And you as a manager, you're not just managing one rep typically. You're managing on the low end, usually 4 or so. On the high end, it could be 8 to 10. And each of those reps probably has, a dozen, maybe even a couple dozen deals. And so you're able to see the landscape of what's working and what's not. And you're able to x-ray diagnostic issues in a way that reps cannot do for themselves, which justifies your existence as a manager, frankly. So let's go into getting tactical with this. in the course, you talk about a template that managers can use for issue diagnosis to bring their reps to the next level. Tell us what goes into that template and how managers can use it to unlock new levels of performance for their account executives.
Yeah, absolutely. So most frontline managers are going to be able to look at key metrics, whether it's in outreach, sales loft, Salesforce, and see ultimately where the reps are struggling. So is it, conversion rate? Is it sales cycle? Is it deal size? What's preventing them from hitting or achieving or surpassing their quota? From there, once they narrowed that down, it really boils down to the two key functions that a rep is performing through their day. And there's going to be what they do on the phone, how they interact and how they actually sell with their prospects or customers. And then is what are they doing off the phone? So everything from deal management to organization to pipeline cleanliness, pipeline quality, pipeline creation. And so once you start with this checklist and say, all right, if let's say conversion rate is the thing that my rep is struggling with, and they're having a tough time setting next steps. And if we know what that is, that they're not bucketing the last 5 or 10 minutes to go through next steps, what that plan should be. And we found that, okay, it's on the phone, it's next steps. You can go listen to Gong and find the last 5 or 10 minutes of every single call and take the last 5 calls, spend 25 minutes listening to 5 minutes from each and understanding what they need to do to improve that. Coach to that specific instance. And then on the next call, whether that's that day, the next day, you can follow up immediately to see if there's improvement based off that coaching, right? So that's kind of on the phone. And if you bear with me here, if we see that it's something that they are doing, they're doing all the right things on the phone, they're having great interactions with their customers, but they're still struggling to close deals. And it really boils down to, let's say, the quality of their pipeline. This checklist gives you the tools to dig in as a manager to see, okay, are they operating with prospects that are in the right company size, right? Based off your individual or ideal customer profile. Do they have the right person that they're actually speaking with? Let's say they're not getting high enough in power. And you can go down this checklist to find, okay, great. So they're doing the right things on the phone. They've got the right company size, but boom, that's what it is. They're not operating with the right decision maker. They're talking to either too low of prospects or somebody from a different department. And then you can coach directly to that instance, right? So on your next call, we want to make sure we're getting to power. We want to make sure we're introing these people or talking to these people, and you're coaching to a specific thing that they can be improved very quickly, as opposed to, hey, just go close more deals, right? Which is the ultimate thing that most managers revert to and, never gets us to where we want to go.
Yeah. Sell more faster. Yeah. One of the things we were chatting about on your QBR over at Webflow the other day is getting to specificity when it comes to defining focus areas, right? Like the example both you and I use is like close more deals or sell more faster is not specific to coach your reps to. You've got to get hyper concrete, hyper specific so that you're moving the needle on a specific skill or behavior. And so you just walked us through kind of 2 dimensions, right? There's on the phone activities, there's off the phone activities. I have found that many managers do not have any sort of grab bag of tips, tactics, strategies, insights for how to actually do the coaching once they've identified a focus area. So what can you say about that? If you had like a frontline manager listening who, maybe they're in their first year or they've just never been trained on how to deliver coaching, how would you guide them?
Yeah, it's a great point because I think one of the benefits of this guide, even for me, is that it gives you a very tactical game plan of how to coach once you identify the problem. So once you've identified the issue that needs improvement, that's the first step in the process. How do you actually not only prepare for that conversation, but then sit down with that rep to go through what that coaching should look like, and then more importantly, how you hold them accountable to that coaching, right? Because so often a manager can tell you, hey, Chris, I want to see you set next steps on the next call. And then it just floats out there into the abyss. And so part of this guide says, all right, not only do you need to block time as a manager, and this is a key instance that you're actually preparing for that one-on-one where you can go through this checklist, find out what needs to be improved, then have that discussion with the rep, align on the next steps, just like you would any prospect or customer. You're aligning with your rep on what needs to be improved. You're documenting it down together, and then you're basically setting next steps for yourself as a manager to hold them accountable, whether it's after that next call, whether you're setting a delayed Slack message or email for them to follow up. But then how are you operating the rest of the week to ensure that they're actually taking the coaching and applying
it? I have found that when people have such a well-structured framework to solve a problem like you do for diagnosing reps and their potential issues and getting them to the next level, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but most of the time when I see that happen, that person at some point in their career struggled with this very thing. And they probably had like a little bit of a dark moment at some point where they made a decision, I'm going to figure this out. And so what's your story? Tell us like the origin story of you coming up with this. What did you struggle with, and how did you come to this framework and this set of principles and techniques that you teach in the course?
Yeah, I do have to give some credit where credit is due. One of my first management jobs, I worked under Kevin Dorsey, and was blessed with having a fantastic mentor, especially when it comes to building out processes and just building in general. And as we were building out a lot of the playbooks and the processes at a company called Snack Nation back in the day at Los Angeles, we were struggling and kind of hitting our heads against the wall about how do you consistently coach reps? And as we were scaling this business and breaking into new territories and going from SMB to corporate to enterprise, we needed a process, a framework that could be repeatable. And so after I left and actually went to go manage enterprise sales at Zillow, it was a completely different process. We went from selling snacks to, selling multi-million-dollar contracts for brokers and real estate owners. And I realized that with a guide and a framework, this can be applied to almost any sales capacity, whether it's SDR, SMB, corporate, enterprise, because the steps of the sales cycle should be very similar. Now, granted, anybody that adopts this at a frontline manager level, they can tweak and, make it more specific for their individual org. But my years of going from Snack Nation to Zillow and then over to being the director of sales at Outreach and building out a full new process at Outreach, I realized that honing in on this guide was kind of my staple and something that I could always trust on, especially with, you talked about it with a team of like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps. Every rep is going to have something different that they need to improve, whether that's steps, whether that's, specificity of the personas they're working out, multi-threading. And so if you're able to use this one tactical guide, block the time to figure out what that may be for each rep, then repeat the process for coaching. Gosh, nothing has made my life easier or less stressful as a manager, I'll tell you that, because now I know how and what to coach each rep on versus, like you said, those dark times of kind of beating my head against the wall and not knowing what I'm doing.
Last question for you. This can either be a personal story or it can be a story that you've observed from other people. But what's your favorite success story of either you or somebody else using some of these techniques to transform a rep's performance? Walk us through your favorite one.
Yeah. So when I just started at Outreach, I took over a team from a couple other managers that kind of, took reps from each and built it onto my team. So I had reps that I'd never managed before, a couple that had been veterans at Outreach and been there for a long time, and a couple that were newer. And I had one individual that I started working with that was a very talented salesperson, but was having a lot of trouble just getting to that next step of actually getting closed deals won. And I would review the calls, and this was a really deep dive for me as I started reviewing the calls and realized, okay, the discovery sounds great. The demo sounds great. But when we get to that last position of power, he was having trouble kind of either, what we call getting the credit card, getting the DocuSign done. So through this checklist, I actually figured out that one of the key things that he was doing or essentially not doing was simply asking for the sale, right? So he'd done a lot of the great discovery, done a lot of the great demo, but when we got to negotiation or got to that final step, it was simply the point of like helping that person buy.
Mm-hmm.
Through this checklist, I was able to go through and realize, okay, and I won't use his real name, I'll call him Larry on this call, but I sat down with him and said, Larry, like I want to take an opportunity to listen to the last couple calls and the last 5 minutes of these final negotiation calls where it comes down and you're basically letting them off the hook too easy. You're not saying, hey, we've gone through this process, we've aligned to the mutual action plan. Like, are we ready to move forward? Do you believe that this is the best thing for your business? And basically asking for the sale at that point to implement outreach to help their business. And once we were able to realize that and click on it, he put a little post-it note, because we were still in the office at this time. So he had his post-it note on his desk that said, ask for the sale. And it got down to every single time he was able to confidently ask for the DocuSign to be sent out, ended up closing more business, ended up becoming a top rep, made it to President's Club. And then I ended up actually, when I became director, promoted him up to manage underneath me. So it was an awesome tip, I think, from looking back at this guide. A lot of managers probably would have struggled and said, hey, he sounds good on the calls, but he's not closing it. Wasn't able to find what that exact thing was and confidently asking for the sale. But going through this checklist, going through the guide allowed me to kind of tick off all the things that he was doing well and find the area of circle that he was missing, coach to that, and then see him improve from there.
It's powerful. As a side note, I also like this story because I feel like closing gets a little bit of a bad rap these days, where like some people go so far as to say like, you don't ever have to close at all. Closing techniques aren't a thing. Closing like just happens. Yeah. And I agree that like closing becomes a natural byproduct after doing a lot of things right in the front end of your sales cycle. But sometimes you got to push people to make a decision, and it's not complicated. You don't have to be cute about what techniques you're going to use. Sometimes, to your point, you just have to ask for the business and say something like, is there anything stopping us from moving forward? Yeah. Or should we get rocking and rolling here? Right? Like that's not even a closing technique. That's probably the worst closing technique that anybody has ever used ever in any selling environment, but it's better than just kind of sitting there twiddling your thumbs. Yeah. So Sean, we're up on time here. I'm going to talk a little bit about your course. I'm going to pass the torch over to you in case you want to give anybody a call to action to connect with you or whatever the case is. But like I have mentioned to everybody listening, Sean has done an exceptionally good course with us. It is called Unlock the Level Up. It is how top producing frontline managers use issue diagnosis, just in the way that Sean's been describing on this episode, to help unlock new levels of performance for the account executives that they lead and manage. And that course should be going live on the pclub.io website pretty soon here. You'll be able to find it in the courses section. And so go check that out. And Sean, any either parting words for everybody listening or any, I guess, calls to action for them in case you connect with people?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. It's just something I'm truly passionate about. I work with a lot of newer managers that are entering the space, and so many of them are never taught how to do this, right? I think we're seeing this across the board in so many companies that whether you are a top producing AE or you maybe came from another department, you're promoted to manager and the enablement essentially stops, right? Any enablement programs are 2 to 3 weeks as a boot camp once you start at the company, whether you're an SDR or an AE. But it's so often that managers are kind of thrown out there and just said, hey, go teach everyone what you know. And so it's rare that they're given actual tactical tools on how to improve. But this one thing, if I'm going to impart anything on a new manager, nothing has made my life personally easier or less stressful when I know how to coach my reps and how to hold them accountable. Having that framework to do it has been the biggest unlock for me, and I'm excited for you all to see it.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is your number one job as a manager, in my opinion, is to get things done through other people. Yeah. And one of the best ways to get things done through other people is to unstick the things that are keeping them from getting those things done on your behalf. So, Sean, thanks so much for showing up today, and we'll see everybody in the next episode.
Thanks, Chris.